A hearty welcome to all the students present this evening. It's now midwinter and we can nearly call it our Winter African Academy Student Development sessions. But I'm Professor Jeanette Maroots, and I'll be facilitating this evening's session on your literature review, exploring the different review variants for use with varying literature sources. Tonight's session is part one of two sessions. So we will start off tonight, and then tomorrow night we have another session. You can imagine that conversations around literature reviews are quite diverse. It's quite a lot of information to cover, quite a lot of basics to get under the belt. So I hope you have an enjoyable session this evening. If you've been to my previous session, I always say it's useful to have a notebook or something else where you can take additional notes. We'll also be doing some exercises, and then it might be useful for you to also check your knowledge as we progress through this evening and tomorrow evening. As always, we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So also jot down potential questions that you might have, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So for tonight, buckle up, and here we go with the presentation first. I'll close my camera for now, and then I will be putting it back on a bit later. All right, so the literature review presentation is quite broad. And for those of you who have attended sessions on your literature review previously, or maybe with me in the past, we will be covering in the first part the basics of your literature review, also just clarifying some terminology. If you are a new student and early in your studies, that might assist you. As I said last week when we had a session, that every research has its own jargon, and often we need to understand the language first before we can do what we need to do in the research process. So we'll be covering all of that before we do a bit of a deeper dive, which will then be the different review variants, and we'll be talking around the varying literature sources. So for this evening in part one, we're mostly going to cover the what, why, and how of the literature review. And then tomorrow evening, we're looking at writing up and common problems and challenges that we might face when doing a literature review, and how we can attend to those. For those who have in previous years attended my sessions, don't despair if the slides seem very similar. There is reworked slides, and there's also new exercises in. So always a good idea to maybe attend more than one of a session, and sometimes we can only absorb that much, especially if you are new and working on your proposal, or you haven't done research for a while. So this is a warm-up session before we delve deeper. As always, I start with this slide even before we begin. And these are the four aspects that I find is most important when we consider and start to think about our literature review. One of the most important aspects is the GIGO aspect, and that relates to garbage in, garbage out. Now, literature review is an output. We deliver something at the end. And if we put garbage in our literature review, or if we read garbage for our literature review, then we will get garbage going out. So we're going to talk about measures. How do you critically evaluate your sources, what is seen as sources of evidence, and how we go about selecting our sources that is of high quality. And in that way, we have good critical material going in, and we will have good critical material going out. So first, please remember the GIGO. Even if you get tired and you get fed up of reading, please keep up reading in critically reading substantive articles and not just reading to substantiate a point. The next very important aspect is know the librarian. The librarian is your best friend. If you haven't met your subject librarian yet, please contact either your supervisor, who can refer you to your librarian, your subject librarian, or you can contact them on the website, the UNISA website, and the library part of that. But I'll also go into some depth and show you where you can find the sources on the library site, because that's such an important place to begin. Then very important training. There's quite extensive training taking place from the library and other training. So please go to as much training as you possibly can. And then it's not just a case of going to training, but also then to practice. So whenever you get new information, go back to your literature review, see if you can refine, practice in refining it, and keep it up to date. And then I guess the most important thing that you will need, other than the top three, is the issue around time. And I'll give you some hints just now when we get to very specific types of literature reviews, how long they could potentially take. But you need time, and you need a consistent engagement. So please, when you start planning your projects, make sure you have enough time. In your conceptualization phase, which we spoke about last week, you need time for the literature review. You would need time again when you develop your instruments. You will need time again when you get to the discussion part of your findings. So you will be dealing with literature at different times in your project. So please have parts of your days, weeks, where you have chunks of time to read and then chunks of time to write. All right, so the literature review is a project. As much as you have your research project, the literature review is a project on its own as well. So as your research project has different phases and has a methodology, and then the findings and a discussion and a conclusion, your literature review has similar aspects related to executing it. So your literature review, it doesn't really matter what type of a review you do, your review will have an aim or a purpose. The review will have research questions. You will need to report on the type of review you're doing, so the design, the methods that you used for your review. You will need to write up the findings and the results. And we had a question last week. We had quite a few questions about literature reviews, how to present your findings or your results. We spoke about it a bit last week. It would have a conclusion. And so it's very important to realize that your literature review is driven by your project's research aims, objectives, scope, and very importantly, the time you have available. So while we are working through the basics of doing a literature review, we will be addressing all these aspects. But when you write up your literature review, this will probably be the sections that you will have in the literature review. So often we don't really think very much of the first three. We just jump up and write our findings. But the reader would also like to know the first three aspects, and that is the aim and purpose, your research questions for the literature review, and they will be unique to the literature review. It will most probably not be your research question per se, but the literature review has a specific question. And then shortly your design and the methods that you use. And that simply goes to also then evaluate your literature review. Can someone else doing a similar review follow the same steps? Would they get the same results? And can we then evaluate your literature review as a critical body of work that you produce? The important thing also to remember is that if you do your literature review properly and have all these aspects well taken care of, your literature review can be seen or can be used as a publication from your thesis or your dissertation already. So, you know, from 2020, a master's student needs to have submitted a research article before they can graduate, and for a PhD student, it is 2 articles that needs to have been submitted and accepted. So please start very early in your research project to think about articles and conceptualizing them, but your literature review could potentially be one of your very first articles. Right. So let's have a look at the nitty-gritty. So what is the purpose of the literature review? So in a literature review, we aim to survey. So we are checking out the landscape of the literature. We analyze the literature, and then we synthesize the literature. So if you were at the sessions last week when we talked about Bloom's taxonomy and how you could use Bloom's taxonomy in your objectives, you will see that these action verbs such as analyze and synthesize is within the highest hierarchy where critical thinking takes place in Bloom's taxonomy. So it goes without saying that the skills that you need for a literature review is higher order thinking skills, critical thinking skills, and those are skills that you need to practice. So the review, the content could cover existing research, theories, discourses, and other evidence, and we'll speak about that now. But very importantly is your own critical evaluation and discussion of the content. So your literature review can be written as an argument, for instance, where you indicate points of view or you make certain statements. You take cognizance of any controversy on the literature that you're studying, that you can identify the gap in that you aim to address in your research. So the biggest skill that you need to demonstrate here, and you are demonstrating this for the examiner, you are writing a literature review for the examiner first, and maybe then for the journal reviewer. And that will be your ability to demonstrate your familiarity within the existing knowledge and debates in the field. So you need to demonstrate to the readers that you are up to date with the current discourses, existing research, potential theories, and evidence in the field that you are investigating for your literature review question. So very important is that you need to, from the beginning, realize that your literature review isn't just a description. It's not just about John said that and Sia said that, and just describing what's already there. It is about describing, but then critically also analyzing what there is, and then synthesizing the information again in a coherent way to produce and identify the gaps which you're going to aim to attend to in your research project. A question that I often get, and I'm sure it might pop up in this session again tonight, I'm trying to be proactive because the question comes up every time, and that's around the terminology that we use. That's often very confusing when we deal with literature reviews. And the question that often comes up is, what's the difference between a literature review, a theoretical framework, and a conceptual framework? Now, what makes this confusing is that we often read research books or articles that use the words interchangeably, and that becomes very confusing for us when we try and understand what is meant by certain terminology. So I hope that after tonight I can clarify these concepts for you. A literature review provides the research context and showcases the need for your study. A theoretical framework provides a general set of ideas in which your study occurs, or the overarching theoretical constructs. We'll talk about more examples in a minute. And then a conceptual framework is how you, as a researcher, understand the relationships among the variables in your own study based on your readings and understandings. So you can develop a conceptual framework at the end of your literature review, or even at the end of your research project. So let's just see in this table what is different. So a literature review, remember we said, is a critical appraisal or a review of existing published work in a selected area. It explores what is already known in order to highlight a gap. So a literature review is backward looking. We are reporting on what has been done. Now, a theoretical framework describes the theory behind your research or your research problem. So those would be, I often say, your theoretical framework it's nearly like the glasses that you put on to look at literature. So you could, for instance, if your topic is in education, you might be looking at your research topic in education through the lens of Bondura's theory, for instance, an educational theory. Or you can put on other glasses and look at your either your literature review or potential in framing of your research project through another glass. So the theoretical frameworks is your glasses in terms of theories, which you are observing your literature and your study potentially as well. So it conceptualizes and analyzes the theoretical approach that the research will use to fill the gap. And a theoretical framework is forward-looking. Now, when we go back to and address what is a conceptual framework, you can then have a conceptual framework developed based on your findings or your results in your literature review, where you have synthesized everything, analyzed, and then you synthesize it potentially in a new conceptual framework. Or you can develop a conceptual framework after your findings and integrate both of these conceptual frameworks. So a conceptual framework is something you develop based on evidence. The evidence can be literature, your literature review, or the evidence can be your data at the end of the study, and you can also combine all of those into a larger conceptual framework. So just to give you an example, for instance, I did a scoping review to look at my research question is what support is available for postgraduate students to support their wellness. Once the themes from the literature was analyzed and put together, I then looked at this outcome through the Bronfman-Brella's ecological theory, and I then presented the findings of the scoping review according to the theory of Bronfman-Brella, and then developed a conceptual framework. So with a conceptual framework, there's always evidence, and then you link the different findings or aspects to have something, to develop something new, and that something new is potentially then a conceptual framework. So I hope that clarifies the difference between a literature review, a theoretical framework, and a conceptual framework. All studies will have a literature review. Most studies will have a theoretical framework, but not all studies will have a conceptual framework. Okay, I hope that makes it a bit clearer for you in terms of the concepts that we use, and which is often very confusing. All right, so what can a literature review do? It can find out what information exists on a topic. It can identify gaps in the literature. It can show relationships between previous studies or theories. It can identify methodologies and techniques that were previously used in previous studies. It can identify people working in the field who are the main voices and seminal works, or who are the people involved in the discourses in this topic. So a literature review is very handy, and it's also very necessary to frame our research in the current body of knowledge, to identify gaps, to show relationships, and to identify the voices in that area of research. The next slide is just some caveats. Qualitative grounded theories, there's a debate around whether there should be literature in the beginning as a separate chapter. There will always be, all studies will have literature in their background, their problem statement. But in a grounded theory, some discourses go around the fact that if you do a grounded theory, your argument is that there isn't currently any theory on the topic, and therefore it wouldn't make sense to do a literature review because you are potentially deciding on a grounded theory, because there isn't. But there are also arguments for literature and how to use literature in grounded theory. So please, this is one of the qualitative designs where there's a debate around the use of literature. Then the other is qualitative literature controls, where you might not have a complete literature review in the beginning of a qualitative study, but that the bulk of literature is after the findings. So if you have a very purist mindset of qualitative research, and the argument around qualitative research is that it's inductive by nature, and therefore you will have the bulk of your literature in your discussion of your results. All right, but those are just, if you do run into these arguments and debates, that you are at least just aware that there are debates also around the place of literature reviews in certain designs, and where the literature, the bulk of the literature then takes place. So in a quantitative study, the bulk of the literature would be in the front end, where uh, after the background and the problem statement, you will, in most cases, use your literature review to design your instruments, your surveys, and that is your point of departure, where in qualitative studies, the bulk of your literature is based on the evidence from your findings and then comparing and contrasting with previous studies in terms of the results. Right to the beginning, we mentioned that there are different types of sources. So if we say we're doing a literature review, then we need to find literature. So where can we find literature, and which literature could be potentially used? So our sources could be in terms of facts, statistics, and research findings. We can use theories and interpretations. We can use the methods and procedures. So we can do, for instance, a literature review to only highlight, for instance, in your methods and design section, to justify why you are using certain designs. You can go back to your literature review and do assessment to see in this topic what methods have been used. Were they more quantitative, more qualitative? And maybe you can then argue why you're doing one or qual or both. So that can be a source of information. Information could be opinions, beliefs, or points of view, but that is often more the softer types of sources, and they are not empirical. So facts, statistics, and research findings, theories, interpretations, and even methods and procedures are sources with evidence, so they are scientific sources. Opinions, beliefs, and points of view could be important, if maybe just to make the study current in what is the current discourses. So for instance, if you're doing a study on 30 years of democracy in South Africa, you might look at newspapers to see what are the current discourses. Especially if it's something new, like bringing in what the last elections showed. There might not be articles on it yet, but there are many opinions and points of view that you can maybe find online, blogs, in newspapers. Then also anecdotes, people that have told you stories, clinical impressions, or narrations of incidents and situations. So it could have been something that was shared by a person, somebody that had that's an expert in the field, and maybe narrations that they gave at a conference or something like that. So when we look at our scientific resources, they are often in journals, books, reports, theses, dissertation, conference proceedings. And we get those from our databases. Government circulars are also seen as a source, a credible source. And then please also remember the grey literature. What we mean by grey literature is literature that is unpublished. And you will find many theses and dissertations aren't published as articles. They are unpublished dissertations and theses, and they are found on the the different universities' library repositories. And that's very important to also consider those, to make sure that your study hasn't previously been done already, for instance. But it also can be a very excellent source of evidence that hasn't necessarily found its way into journal articles. And they are then, by the fact that the evidence has been generated through scientific measures, they are a source of scientific evidence. They have just not been published officially, other than that they are lying in the university's repositories. And you will then, even with your own study, once you have gone through the examination process, the library will ask your supervisor to send them a copy of your final thesis or dissertation, and that will then be uploaded in the university repository. All right, so more or less where you could find information from. So there are scientific sources, and there are opinions, beliefs, and points of view, or anecdotes. All right, then what I'd like to do now is just to mention first things first. So right in the beginning, I spoke about that you need to familiarize yourself with the UNISA library site. And to make it easier for you, sometimes if you are very early in your study and you haven't played around on the websites and the library sites, you might find it difficult to navigate. So I've given you the links so that you can get right to where you need to be. Identifying your subject librarian or to request a literature search. You can also request the library or your subject librarian to assist you with your literature search. And there is just a short form that you complete. And then the library will also assist you with your literature search. Then, very important, attending library training. Please have a look at the My UNISA website. There is so much training going on. And please don't skip the UNISA library training. The events and calendar is on the website, and you just register then when the advertisement comes out, or you can have a look at their calendar and you just press a button and you register to take part in the training. I always suggest to my students that even if they can't make the training, it's maybe from 10 to 11 in the morning, that you register anyway, because once you register, you will have access to the recordings. So then you can go through the training in your own time, but you have to register. So if you haven't played around on the library website, it looks something like this when you enter the library website. It has the guides, e-resources, catalog searches, e-reserves, and e-publication finders. You are very privileged that UNISA's library is the biggest library in Africa, and a lot of their resources are electronic. So there is no excuse not to have access to the most up-to-date research. The repository is huge. The book repository, especially ebooks, are huge. So for your methodology books, the latest editions, you should be able to find there. Many of them are ebooks. So there's not an excuse to say that you can't get to credible resources. They are available. Please make use of those. Everything that you find through these e-resources, whether it's publications or whether it's ebooks, they are free of charge. So I often get students that complain, oh, I found an article on the internet, but I have to pay for it. Now, if you go through the library website and you access the journal from there, the university subscribes to that database or that journal, you would not have to pay anything. And even if the library doesn't subscribe to a certain journal or you need a specific article, you can also request the library to purchase it on a once-off basis. So there shouldn't be any problem for you obtaining the quality and the depth and breadth of articles and literature that you require. Then you will see this is just a snapshot of the library training. There's many different ones, but if you saw the headings in the previous slides, you will see that there is training on every aspect and how to use that. Very important training is using reference sources. The types of sources and how to access those. You've seen the slide on that. You will also find where to request literature search for your review. You can go to the links, and there is also, if you click on it, you will have information that will take you there. But very nice in this section, web tools for students. You can have if you don't have Microsoft Office, you can get a license from UNISA. You can get licenses for your data analysis programs like Atlas and SPSS. There's many tools that's available, and you can have access to all of those. So no excuses. And then very important, there are other project management resources for you. So very often with your proposal, you would need to put together a project plan for your study. There are many tools that you can use, but it's also very important that you are able to track and keep track of your project. Then there's also resources that could help you focus. There's white noise, noise cancellation. There is music. There's many tools that can also assist you with the softer issues like focusing and blocking out noise or using white noise for being able to focus. So these are just some by the bytes, but just to give you an idea what is available from the library, and that you should have all the resources available to you to really approach your literature review with the tools that you require. So those were just a few slides to make you aware of what's available. So let's go and have another strategy. And I think I spoke about some of this in the previous session last week when we looked at the conceptualization phase of your research. And someone asked, so how do I how do I know, where the top journals are in my field? So I always say when you start off, identify the top 5 to 10 journals in your field. And it's very easy to do that. You can Google that. So ask Google what is the top 10 journals in, for instance, my focus, my area is higher education and research development. So I would ask for the 5 or top 10 journals in research education, higher education, for instance. And then from there, in the other slides, I'll show you how you can then evaluate those sources to check for their credibility and also their standing. And we want to do that so that we can identify the most prominent voices in our field. So in our literature review, we always stand on the shoulder of giants. So your literature review is one way that you can identify the giants, stand on their shoulders and make a contribution on that level. You can also identify the literature conventions of your school or your field or your department from the, we call it manuals. Those are your manuals. You can also create a Google Scholar alert or on Mendeley. And when you create a Google Scholar alert, you can, they will send you on your email the latest publications on your topics. So from the Google Scholar homepage, you can go to the top left menu, click alerts, and then create an alert and fill out the search words and put in your email address, and then they will send you on a daily or twice a week or once every 2 weeks, depending on how you do the setting. You will have the latest articles that is being published on your topic, which I think is really something very worthwhile, and in that way you keep up with the current research in your field. So if you haven't yet created a Google Scholar alert, there's also alert on Mendeley. Please do so. It's an easy way to get access to new research. Then to get to the nitty-gritty, just as your project is led by a research question, you need to have a research question that is specific enough to guide you to the relevant literature. So your literature review also has a research question. So for instance, what is the state of knowledge or the current discourses on organizational bullying? And so remember last week I gave you an example of a study that was done on nursing education institutions and bullying. So the question that could have led that literature resource research might have been, what is the state of knowledge or current discourses in organizational bullying, for instance? And then you would use the specific keywords, for instance, such as organizational bullying or any other way that you set up your search terms. But then you can see that your search will be a lot more focused than when you just go in blindly and try to find a focus in another way. So your research question of your literature review will provide you with a focus to have a focused literature review. We've mentioned these before: your sources, books, periodicals, paper, web pages, thesis, dissertations, we've mentioned. And very important is avoid depending exclusively on easily accessible electronic full text resources. The mere fact that it's easy to get to them might cause that you don't critically evaluate the credibility of the source. Many research articles are published on the web, which are published in rogue journals or journals that are not accredited, or articles that have not been peer reviewed. So you need to be very critical of the journal articles that you access and what the standing of the journal is, and then also what the standing of the article is. So be wary and don't exclusively depend on easily accessible electronic full text resources. I know already when we talk about search engines, someone is going to ask, is ResearchGate a search engine? And is it a good idea to get articles from ResearchGate? ResearchGate isn't a data base. It is simply a storage nearly facility that authors use to really advertise their research further. So it isn't a database per se. You can use it and then go and look for articles via the library website. Very often, because there's an embargo in certain journals to make it accessible immediately, the authors will put a preprint on there because they can't put the full print yet because there's an embargo, sometimes 2 years. And or you need to then pay for those sources. So if the full text isn't available, you can email the author and they will usually give it to you for free, but then they will tell you it's only for your personal use. So please check that the databases are legitimate. We'll give you example of different databases, but that goes with your ability to evaluate your sources. So how do we do that? You need to identify how reputable is the source. So if it is a journal, is it a peer-reviewed journal? Is it a high standing? Or is it a journal that is known to be there's many journals that come from the East that people pay and huge amounts, and then the article is published, in 2 days, and they haven't been peer reviewed, for instance. So be careful. There is non-reputable sources as well. Is the source current 3 to 5 years? We had a discussion about that last week as well. We would like our discourses to be current, but there are times when we have seminal sources that are much, much older. So certain theories or the original sources are from the 1800s or the 1900s or 1950, 1970. That's not to say that you cannot use them. Just to alert the reader if they're not aware that this is a seminal source that you're using or a seminal source from which you are departing. But the bulk of your literature should be current. And current is different for different disciplines. In technology, 3 years is way too late. 3 months might already be too late because it develops so fast. Very important is the source peer reviewed. So you need to identify from the journal, is the articles peer reviewed? What is the source's impact factor? And I'll show you in a minute how to get to that. Is the author from a reputable institution? And that's also very interesting. When you open up an article, there's a reason why the author information is there, and it will always have the author's affiliation. So you can quickly gauge, are they from a reputable institution? Then very important, have you seen other authors cited in other sources? So has this author that you intend using, have they been used and cited by other researchers? So when you open an article on the web, it will immediately tell you how many citations it has. So an article that you open with 300 citations or 3,000 or 300,000, you can already see that others have cited this author and that they are in good standing or that their work has been absorbed. Those are just a few tips how you can evaluate the sources, the quality of the sources that you're going to use. Also, last week I gave the email to access this Sky Margo Journal and Country Ranking. So if you have or you want to inquire on a specific journal, in the top right-hand corner, you can enter the journal name. And then if it is a tier 1, 2, 3, or 4 journal, it will immediately take you to say, for instance, I put in higher education research and development, which is a journal that is highly ranked in my field. It will immediately take you to that journal. It will tell you from the country from which it is. It will tell you what subject area it covers, and they will also tell you who's the publisher. Now, Taylor and Francis, I'm sure you all know, and you all know that it's a reputable publisher. So if I carry on further and look at the metrics of this journal, it will give you metrics in terms of collaborations. It will give you metrics in terms of how many times this articles in this journal have been cited in the past years. And then very important, it will tell you what is the journal's standing. So this journal is a quintile 1 journal, which means it is the top of the tiers. So it has a high impact factor and a high citation factor. So I can then, with a good heart, know that the articles that I use from this journal is peer-reviewed. They are high quality with a high impact journal. You might find other articles that's a quintile 2, 3, or 4. A quintile 4 journal is not necessarily bad. It might still be a young journal. If a journal doesn't appear in this, it means it's not rated at a quintile 1, 2, 3, or 4. Now, there's many journals in South Africa that you might not find on here, and that simply means that they have not yet achieved quintile rating. Doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad or poor. It just means they're not quite there yet. All right, so this is just an idea how you can go about to identify credible journals and then credible sources via that. You can also then click on this journal site, and it will take you to the journal homepage as well. So a very useful source to check the credibility of journals. And then again, when we spoke about databases, here are some of the databases, some of the publishers, and you will see that when you start on any of these, that you can decide which databases do you want to include. You can also include all of them, and it will search all the databases. So there are many databases that are credible, and you would have access to all of those from the library website. Okay, so let's look at when you do selectively read through your subject matter. So what do you do when you now have a few articles? What you would typically do is that you would read through the articles or the subject matter. And as you start reading through the articles that you've identified, you might find common themes or issues linking your sources or your themes that you identify. And this is now how the criticality comes in. So first of all, you read. Then you start interrogating what you are reading. And this is partly where the critical aspect comes from. You know, now it's a credible journal, it's a credible author, the article has been peer-reviewed, and now you start reading. So first you might just read a few articles and then, you know, ask yourself, so what are they saying about the topic? Are they proposing similar or varied solutions? Is there a missing component that you've identified in the field or in these studies? How effectively is the content presented, and is it framed in line with the relevant theory? Do they highlight a trend, or is there a contentious argument in the field? And you can choose then how to structure your review. And we spoke last week about how do you go about structuring your review, but we'll attend to that again. But you can now see how you don't just read. You now start reading critically, and you start reading and asking critical questions. You don't just look for something in the article that confirms your argument or just adds to the description. I said that support should be only counseling. B said support should be counseling and good eating habits. C doesn't mention any of those. Those are just descriptions of what you found. It hasn't yet critically been interrogated. All right, so questions that you can then ask to critically interrogate what you're reading could be one of these. So you could start off with common themes and trends. And then you can decide, based on that, decide, is there missing components? Are there gaps? Can you identify trends, or is there contentious issues? And you can then use that to present your literature review in a more critical manner. So, as I just said, your review can take two forms. It's purely descriptive, where you bring out themes and trends. And that's fine on honors level and masters of limited scope. So masters of limited scope simply means that you have it's a taught masters. There is a taught component, and then there's a research component that usually counts 50%. And typically the honors level projects and masters of limited scope are limited projects and is completed in limited time, usually 1 year. So a purely descriptive review would be okay in these limited scope dissertations. They would be projects and dissertations. However, when we move to a full master's and especially a PhD study, we need to do more than that. And it's critical that in these studies we start integrating and synthesizing, where we look at a critical assessment of the literature, comparing, contrasting, raising questions, evaluating and showing relationships so that the key themes emerge. And yeah, you need the skills in critical thinking. Now, please don't be put off on an honors or master's level not to introduce critical thinking. You can. I'm not saying you don't have to, you can't. But it's a requirement on a full master's and on a PhD level that you show the critical appraisal of the sources and also the critical arguments around the sources. So we've said a lot about what a literature review is. Maybe just one slide on what it's not. So literature review is not just an annotated bibliography of everything you've read or a summary of every article that you've read. And we often find this, that the literature reviews are simply a summary of everything that the student has read. So they read article 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they give a summary in one paragraph of article 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then that's it. Now, that's not a literature review. That's a description at best, but that is not what a literature review is. It also does not include extended quotations, direct or paraphrased. And this is very, very important. You will usually find that as you put your chapters through Turnitin, the chapter with the highest potential rate of similarity in your Turnitin report is very often your literature review. And the reason for that is that people, you use lines and lines of direct quotes, either direct or paraphrased, but they are just stating it as is in the article, and that aligns with the annotated bibliography of what they've read. The idea is that there is some form of analysis and then a form of synthesis. So it's not just about describing what is in the field. And you'll often find that examiners are very critical of that. So please try and avoid direct quotations in your literature review. Please paraphrase, but then with a paraphrasing, please start to build in, criticality around that, looking for themes, looking for relationships, critiquing, and generally just doing a thorough job of it. But be careful for direct quotes, okay? It pushes up your similarity index hugely. You must paraphrase, and then you must bring in a more critical eye on what you are reading. Okay, so we also, in the final slide, I want to let you know that it's not a linear process. When you read a literature review, it's presented in a logical and often linear process. But doing the actual literature review is not a linear process. And what do I mean by that? It means that it's not point 1, point 2, point 3, and you never revisit point 1 or point 2. It's a very iterative process. So it means that you could read and then maybe map themes. You can critically assess, and then you discover, oh no, but there is something wrong, or there's something more that I need to know, and you go back to the first step where you need to acquire articles, and then you need to read again, and then you start refining. And as you're refining your initial ideas, you might find, no, I need to add an area, or I need to select, or I need to read further. So your literature review isn't done until the day that you submit your dissertation or your thesis. There's always new information coming up. There's always new studies being done. There might be something that when you started your PhD 3 years ago wasn't, I'm thinking of COVID. None of my students could have predicted that COVID would have an impact on not just their research process, but on the topics they were looking at. In some cases, we had to realign topics completely. And that caused new literature reviews or adaptations or additions to literature reviews. So your literature review is never really done. You might even find that when you want to publish an article, that you need to redo your literature review if your sources are dated. And I really don't wish it upon you. It is very time consuming. So please make sure that your resources are always updated in terms of new research, different opinions, additional discourses. All right, so there's a few things that we now know that a literature review is not. We also need to carefully consider where the literature is best placed in your overall study. So we can use literature other than in our formal literature review chapter. We can use literature in different parts of our proposal or different parts of our dissertation or thesis. So very often we use statistical or historical information in our introduction or background. We can use our literature to support our problem or our rationale for the study. So, for instance, in your background and problem statement, we can use it to identify a gap, and that we can then add to our problem statement. And we can then organize around ideas and themes, not necessarily the sources themselves. So your literature review is alive throughout your proposal, it's alive throughout your dissertation and your thesis. So it's not something that you're going to do once in the beginning of your study and then never do again. All right, so we are going through quite a bit of content, and there's still a few slides left, but then I want to make sure that we've got enough time for questions. So I know it's a lot of information, and I'll stop soon. Part of what I'm going to present now has a few exercises in, and then you can also start to actively participate and not just have a lot of information dumped on you. So right in the beginning of the presentation, we spoke about, hinting towards types and scopes of the different types of reviews. And so the following is just some examples of the different types of literature reviews that you can find, what's their scope, and potentially how long they take. Most popular literature reviews are a narrative review, and or they would just refer to it as a literature review. It is just a straightforward literature review, a very traditional form, focusing on broad topics without a specified methodology or approach necessarily. And those are usually the descriptive literature reviews, and they might be enough in a coursework, master's or introduction to a PhD, or just for your proposal. And this type of literature review can take you anything from 1 to 3 months. It depends on whether you read prior to your dissertation or your thesis. So, for instance, if you are continuing with the same topic that you did in your master's, you completed your master's last year and the next year you enroll for your thesis, then obviously you could build on that master dissertation, and your literature review could easily be done in a week or less because you already have it. If you're starting to read for the first time, then it might take you more than 3 months. And be very, very important, when you do a thesis, a PhD, you do not learn or study for a master's or a PhD. You read for a PhD. And that's very, very important. It's also very important to keep in mind what a PhD stands for. And for those of you that want to give it a bash, please put in the comment section what PhD stands for, and we can have a conversation around that. But that would be just the general literature review that might be sufficient for honors or a coursework master's, or for the introduction of a PhD. Then we can move over to a systematic review, which is a very structured review that answers defined questions with reproducible methodologies. So when you do a systematic review, you will have a defined question for the review. You will have specific methodologies that you followed, and there will be a specific way in which you write it up. Now, systematic review is appropriate for PhD or advanced MA research. You could also, depending on how brave your supervisor is, for a master's study, your project can be a systematic review. And that's it. You might not need to go to the field at all. So remember right in the beginning, we said that a literature review is a project on its own. Now, when we talked about, the components of a literature review, you would see the research process in those components. And therefore, a systematic review, you could do a master's study only using a systematic review and the research process. But a systematic review, you would see, takes longer, anything from 6 to 12 months. And that brings us back to the time that you need to do it, in. So it's important when you start thinking about what type of a review you want to do, is to look at the time you have available to do it in. There's also a meta-analysis. It's a type of a systematic review that usually use statistically analyzed results from previous studies. But I have seen qualitative studies that also uses meta-analysis. So meta means a step above. So it's like a reflecting and reflexivity. So in reflexivity, we think about our reflectivity. So there's a meta level. So you would take, it could be qualitative. You can take what research has been done, and then the analysis would take you to a meta level. So very often it's used in quantitative research, but definitely there are also quite enough examples of using it in qualitative studies. And because it's a form of a systematic review, it more or less takes the same time. A scoping review is something that I would say every study needs. But a scoping review is for a master's study sufficient. For a PhD study in the exploration phase. And a scoping review is used to map the key concepts underpinning a research area and the main sources and the types of evidence that's available. So when I mentioned the scoping review that I did a scoping review to see what support is suggested in literature for postgraduate students. So I was just scoping and scoping the landscape to see what's out there and to map out the key concepts. So a scoping review can be relevant really to any study, preparation stage of your PhD, master's study, honors studies. If you want to do something above honors studies, you could potentially do a scoping review for your honors. But you need to talk it through with your supervisors. Not all supervisors are happy with only doing that, and they would also know your field, whether it's accepted in your field or not. Then a critical review, it critiques the relevant literature on a topic to establish the current state of knowledge. So critical review follows, all reviews has a critical aspect in it. But the main aim of a critical review is to critique all the relevant literature on a topic. So it is on quite a high level, where you really critique what is out there. Very helpful to identify gaps in phenomena, or where you want to really plot the current discourses going on and the critiques. So I wouldn't, and if there's an advanced master's, yes, but not really for masters. Definitely PhD possible. Takes a bit shorter than the systematic reviews, And then finally, I think the one that you might come across as well is integrative reviews, where we synthesize theoretical and empirical literature to provide a comprehensive understanding of a phenomena. Also, you very often find it in PhD studies. Also takes a bit on the longer side, 4 to 8 months. So you can see the reviews that we often use in PhD studies are systematic reviews and integrative reviews, potentially also critical reviews, and meta-analysis then. Where for masters and honors or coursework masters, a narrative or just a literature review would be appropriate, and a scoping review is quite nice for any type of a project. So these are just like teasers for you that you can go and read further on. This is really, the slides here is just to help you with your reading, to tell you what's out there, and that you can start your reading potentially from there onwards. Just a few slides that I'm going to give you an activity, and then we'll go from there. I just want to show you before we go over to the activity. We spoke about that your literature review will be guided by suitable research questions. And I've just given you a few examples of potential questions for the different types of reviews, so that you can maybe just get a feel of how they are formulated. So narrative review, what are the key themes and debate in whatever your topic is, digital marketing or bullying or whatever your topic. So what are the key themes? How has the understanding of mental health evolved over the last decade? So those are just general reviews or narrative reviews. A systematic review could have a question such as, what is the effectiveness of mindful-based intervention on anxiety? You can already see that there are two aspects, and there's a relationship, and it is already becoming a bit more complicated. How do different dietary approaches affect weight loss outcomes in adults? A meta-analysis, what is the overall effect size of cognitive behavioral therapy on depression across different studies? Scoping review, what methodologies are used in research on artificial intelligence and healthcare? Or what are the emerging trends in renewable energy over the last 20 years? I think the question for my scoping review was, what do we know about support strategies for postgraduate students? So usually these questions will all be what and how questions. Critical review, how comprehensive are current theories of social justice in addressing new media contexts? So remember, we said a critical review is critically appraising the current literature, and in a specific with a specific lens. What are the limitations in current research on climate impacts on coastal communities, for instance? Integrative review, potential question, how can theories of behavioral economics be integrated with health promotion practices? Or what does the literature say about the relationship between corporate ethics and consumer trust across different industries? Just a note on integrative reviews. They are often very nice to use, especially if your topic is interdisciplinary. Then an integrative review is really something to think about. And you can see in the last question that there's actually three different disciplines. You've got corporate, you've got the consumer, and you've got the industry. So already potentially three different, discourses, potentially 3 different discourses coming together, or 3 different industries. So integrated review might serve this question very well. So that was just a few examples of what the questions might look like, specifically for literature reviews and the specific reviews. All right, so for the next few minutes, I need you to grab a pen and paper or something where you can make notes on, because the next exercise, I'm going to give you a few research titles and the object of the research, and then I'd like you to identify which type of research, literature review might be the most appropriate. So you will see in the bold, there is the title of the study, and the objective should give you a hint to identify which type of a review might be most suitable. So there are 6 scenarios in total, and so they're on 2 slides. So if you have a piece of paper and a pen, just number it from number 1 to 6, and then I'm going to give you a few minutes to read through the first 3, and then I'll put the next 3 on. But see if you can identify what types of literature reviews might be the most suitable to these research scenarios. So I'm giving you a minute or 2, and then we'll put on the next slides. Okay, I hope that you've had enough time for the first 3. And I'm going to now put on the next 3. So you can imagine the 6 that we've just discussed will be used in one each in one. So it might be a process of elimination for you, but try and you see which objective would then be best suited for the type of literature review. I'm going to put up the next 3 for you. So again, there's the title, the different research projects and their objectives, and see if you, the very first one I've given you the answer. Lucky you. So you need to do number 5 and 6. Some relief in question 4. I've given you the answer. Let's see if you can, from what we presented, identify what review might be the most appropriate. Okay, so I'm just going to start wrapping this exercise up, and I hope you have your numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. You've got the answer 5 and 6, and in the next slide you can evaluate yourself. And these are the types of literature reviews most suitable to each of those projects. So number 1, the most suitable literature review would be a meta-analysis, because it allows for the quantitative combination of data across studies, which is ideal for identifying trends and effectiveness. Number 2, a narrative or general review, ideal for a broad thematic exploration, where the goal is to understand the evolution of ideas rather than answer a specific question. Scoping review, number 3, It's used to scope the field, identify gaps, and clarify working definitions. Number 4, we've already said it's a critical review, but why? It's best for assessing the state of art, discussing various methodologies, and identifying gaps or biases in current studies. Number 5, an integrative review might be the most relevant, as this type combines data from both theoretical and empirical sources, providing a comprehensive synthesis that is suitable for topics involving diverse research and interdisciplinary approaches. And then number 6, systematic review, probably the most appropriate review type for answering specific focused research questions. It uses a methodological approach that involves comprehensive searching, appraisal, and synthesis of literature. All right, so I hope that gave you a bit of a break with all the information just being loaded. I'm just going to finish off with a slide which could assist when we just speak about using specific programs to assist us with managing our literature and also assisting, for instance, in identifying themes and so on. So for qualitative research, you could use Atlas TI. There's a version 23 available now. Just a hint for those of you doing qualitative research and using Atlas TI, please use the latest version. And the reason for that is that the versions evolve and the words that certain versions use change over time. So it's important that you say which Atlas version you used for the examiner or the evaluator to be able to evaluate either your data analysis or, in this case, your literature review. So please say which version you're using, and please use the latest version. So for literature reviews, you can use this for either quantitative or qualitative studies specifically related to the literature review. So what this program does, you can organize your research with advanced categorization. It's assistant visualizing connections between themes or topics, which is very nice. It can automatically identify code significant to the content, and therefore you can build your themes. It eases the retrieval of your literature because it's all put in the same database. It increases your productivity with the intuitive user interface. And what's also very nice, it helps with the collaboration across researchers because you can have more than one researcher on a project, or the supervisor can be added to the project and they can quality check as you go. Or it can also be a reference for the rigor of your research. So Atlas TI is quite useful for literature reviews, either quantitative, qualitative studies. And this is just a snapshot of Atlas TI, and you can then see that you have your different sources that can be uploaded. It will show the actual article, and it will give all the information of the actual article. And then you can do different things with it. You can add comments. You can ask for it to auto code. You can ask for a word cloud. It can count frequencies for you, and it can generate a report. So very useful tool to use. You can have everything on one place and it can do quite a lot for you. There's also an AI coder available in version 23 where you can ask AI to code for you. it does quite a good job. The only challenge I find is that it generates a lot of codes. Yeah, which you would then need to work through. But often very good springboard. So if you are going to do a qualitative study, I would definitely invest in Atlas TI, because you will use it again when you analyze data. Instead of the articles, you will just now upload your interviews, your focus groups, observations, and you would follow the same process. Quantitative, also suggest using it even if you're not going to use it for your data analysis. You'll be using SPSS, for instance, or if you are using a mixed method study. So there's different programs. There's Atlas TI, but there's also in vivo. There's different such programs, but the one that UNISA subscribes to and where you can get a free license to access it is Atlas TI. So really worth it to play around with it a bit, acquaint yourself with it. There's a lot of training for Atlas TI. So please do it early in your studies so that you have time to play around with it, that you can get used to it, go to training, and try it out. It really is worth the while. If you are doing scoping reviews, integrative or the systematic reviews, you can also use programs such as Ryan, RYANN, and it would do something similar to what Atlas does, but just more refined in terms of certain types of reporting. And we'll talk about those types of reporting, and then I will also just show you some clips of how Ryan works. But then, after really doing a lot of information dumping for this evening, I am going to stop sharing the slides, or I'm just going to go to the question and answer section, and then we will look and have a more interactive discussion. So tomorrow night we'll continue. Also quite a bit of information, but we will just do a short summary tomorrow night and then move on to other content. In the questions and answers, if you have specific questions that you want me to address tomorrow night, I can certainly look at them and tell you what I will be presenting, and if I didn't pay attention to it, I can definitely add it for tomorrow evening. Okay, all right. So please, you can still add questions, and I will attempt to answer all your questions. The first question, can you explain grounded theory? What does this mean? The one for my literature control is also not clear in my mind. Okay, Anonymous, this is specific to qualitative research approaches. So in qualitative research, you have a number of approaches. Those are case studies, grounded theory, phenomenological studies, and so on. So grounded theory is a specific qualitative approach. And a grounded theory simply means that you are developing a theory. So we don't use grounded theory in master's studies. It's on a PhD level because you're actually developing theory. Now, the grounded theory comes from the fact that you are developing theory from grassroots. So what you're actually saying by choosing this design is that there isn't any theory available. And therefore, some people contend that you can't have a literature review, a full literature review in a grounded theory study, because you are, by virtue of choosing the study, saying that there isn't something available, and that's why you need to develop theory or a theory. And that's the argument around, is the literature review suitable in a grounded theory study based on that assumption. When we speak about a literature control is also more a qualitative use of words, and it's maybe gone out a bit of fashion, but it was very alive a few years ago. That simply means that in some way or another, all studies have a literature control, is that when you go and look at your findings and you have your discussion, you will now be comparing and contrasting your findings to other research and discussing the findings. So there's a lot of theory built into the discussion as well. But what we mean by literature control, very often in a qualitative, a very purist approach to qualitative research, and that departs from the assumption that it is inductive, then the bulk of the theory will be in the back end of the project and not so much in the front. There will be theory in the front to frame your background, statistics, your problem statement, and so forth. But the bulk of theory in that type of a study will be in the back of the project, not so much in the front. All right, so that's more around designs, but how it relates to literature and the discourses around that. So I hope it's a bit clearer, but you're also welcome to read. Thank you for the interesting presentation. My question is that could we use the lecture notes of instructors as literature resources? I wouldn't suggest you do. Remember, the lecturer's notes is built from sources that she or he used. So you're kind of getting their interpretation of an original source. And that's also very often why we say don't use secondary resources. A primary resource is the actual article that you are using. But if you are saying you're using a statement or a resource that the author used within their paper, we call it a secondary source. And the reason why we say we don't really like to use secondary sources is because that author, what they've written there is their interpretation of the original paper. So you're kind of getting it secondhand. And what we would say is go back to the original source. And I guess the same principle would be in terms of my answer to regarding lecture notes. So I wouldn't reference the lecture notes. You could reference primary sources that they might have mentioned in the instructions and go back to the original source and then read that and make up your own mind and write your own your own thinking around that. But I wouldn't really reference the lecture notes per se. Okay, it's the same argument as would go for secondary sources. Danae was so kind to tell you where you can access the PowerPoint slides. There's a link, and I will send the slides after tomorrow evening session, so it will be there, don't worry. How can one tell if the source is peer-reviewed or not? It will clearly state in the journal that their articles are peer-reviewed. If a journal doesn't say that their articles are peer-reviewed, then they're probably not peer-reviewed, and you can start becoming suspicious of the journal. But if you visit journal sites, I'll give you an example. They will clearly state on the journal site that all articles are peer-reviewed. All right. So go to the actual journal site, and you'll get the information there. What is your take about Sage? I'm obsessed about Sage. I'm also obsessed about Sage. Go big. I thoroughly enjoy SAGE books, their methodology books. I enjoy the SAGE journal, so go big, you're on the right track. But there's also many others that are equally good, but SAGE is good to go with. Not a question, but students can make use of SkyHub. Yeah, it's a website that gives you access to locked articles or journals. It does not unlock all articles, but it's very helpful. Yeah, a good suggestion, but why would you need that if you can get access through the UNISA library without having to pay anything and it's there? So don't really see why you need hacks to access locked articles. You can get the article from the library. Is it allowed or advisable to divide my literature review in 3 sections, defining key concepts, empirical review? Yes, you may do that. You might also, for instance, define your key terms in chapter 1. I would generally try and sort that out in chapter 1 because it frames your entire study. Then your empirical review can be a chapter on its own, and sometimes even the theoretical review or the theoretical the theories that is grounding your research can also be a chapter on its own. But if it's a master study, yes, it can be all in one chapter, for instance, but I would definitely suggest that you move defining your key terms to the front of your dissertation or the first chapter of your dissertation. In your proposal, it's in any event, you need to define your key terms there. But yes, you can do all both the literature review and the theoretical review in the same chapter. You can split it in 2 if it's especially if it's a PhD study. But the defining of the key concepts, if we're talking about chapters, then I would move that to chapter 1. Can you use journals that have no peer review yet or AI topic? Do you always need an in-text citation for every sentence, even if it's in your own words? Yes. If you are using someone else's idea, or if you make a statement, you would need to provide evidence of the statement. So if somebody said that the sun rises at 8 o'clock in Cape Town, you would need to provide evidence for that. And that goes for, so I wouldn't say it's about referencing each section, it's referencing each statement. Unless you are building an argument where you make a statement and then provide the evidence to come to a conclusion. But you would need to reference if you use someone else's ideas, if you make statements, because that needs to be based on evidence. Can you use websites that are practically producing products and testing it? Yes, you could use websites. You know, there's a lot of websites that we use for our research. I'm just thinking about websites like the WHO, World Health Organization, websites like the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN. There are many websites that we reference and that we use. So I don't see you can definitely also use when they're producing products and testing it. You would maybe just need to check on the critically evaluate the credibility of it, but yes, you could use websites as well. I'm currently on chapter 2. Can I use the literature review section from a proposal? Yes, certainly you can. Yeah, so the answer is yes. If it's a master's study, you might be able to use it as is, or you might need to elaborate on it a bit. So if your proposal was just 20 pages, you'll definitely need to elaborate it in the chapter. if your proposal was 40 or 60 pages and you did an elaborate literature review, you could potentially then use it as is. All right. But yes, I mean, everything in your proposal you can use as is. So much of the information you can use in your chapter 1, your introduction, your background, your problem statement, your purpose, objectives, research questions, can be used as they are in your proposal. Then your literature review can be used in chapter 2, and your design and methods in chapter 3. Usually you need to elaborate a bit on them because in the proposal it's maybe just briefly mentioned. But your proposal then can be your chapter 1, 2, and 3. So your answer is easy, it's yes. Systematic into the answers. Great, thank you so much for putting them in there. Very brave. Yeah, I just want to check, is there any more questions? I think I've gone through all that there are now. I hope that all the information is absorbed or will be in the back of your mind as you conduct your literature reviews. If there's anything specific that you want me to talk about tomorrow, just going to stop sharing and just put my camera on again. So please, there's still time if you have any other questions. If you have any topics that you'd like me to explore tomorrow, I can maybe give you a few hints. We're going to look at the designs, how you analyze, how you read, for writing up your literature review. So the more practical aspects we will deal with tomorrow night, the reporting of your review, write-ups, tips, suggestions for the more practical aspect of when you now have the literature, how do you go about presenting it and writing it up. But if there are any other questions, maybe there's some more. Thank you for the compliment. So calm and taking your time, not just rushing. Thank you so much. Thank you for just the feedback as well. Then the last question, what law website would you recommend for master's studies? I simply cannot answer that question. You would need to ask your supervisor or the librarian. I know there's a subject librarian for law specifically, and they would be able to answer you best. I am not a law practitioner or supervisor, so please go back to the library sites and contact the librarian, the subject librarian. They will be able to assist you. There are also on the library website resources and repositories specifically for law. So I'm sure you'll find your answers there. Otherwise, please ask your supervisor. If you haven't been appointed a supervisor, I still come across students that don't have a supervisor yet. Please contact the library and the librarians. They will take you a long way, and you don't need to be stuck and not do anything while you are waiting for a supervisor to be appointed. So if you came to last week's session, you are well on your way to write a proposal. And after tonight's session, you are basically able to do 1, 2, and 3 chapters or get quite a far way, probably a halfway with your proposal. So no reason to feel stuck and not be able to do anything. After these sessions, you should be able to at least get going. And have the tools to be able to do that. So please, in terms of anonymous question on law websites, please contact the library or play around on the library website. I'm sure you'll also find your answers there. But I am not a subject expert in law. Sorry, I can't be more specific. All right. Okay, let's just see. Let's look at e-learning as a topic tomorrow. Anonymous, you would need to be a bit more specific. What about e-learning as a topic? Remember, we're continuing with the literature review and how to execute that, so I'm not quite sure what you mean by let's look at e-learning as a topic. We're not looking at specific topics. We are looking at the execution of a literature review. So if you maybe meant anything differently than what I'm interpreting, but we are not specifically addressing topics per se. We are looking at the design and execution of literature reviews tomorrow night. Okay. Right, I don't see any new questions, and our time is nearly done. So there's time for one or two quick questions. If you still wanted to post anything or suggestions, you're welcome to put them there. Please remember you do have access to the presentations. There are also YouTube videos made of the presentations, so there's no reason why you shouldn't have the information. You have access to that, and the links have been shared. Okay, if there's no new questions coming up, then I'm going to greet you for this evening, and thank you for journeying together on a topic that's quite broad and quite information dense. But then you have some time until tomorrow evening to absorb all the information. Maybe you have questions once you've thought about the presentation, thought about ideas, and you can bring them along tomorrow evening and we can have a look at those as well. So from my side, a good evening, take care, keep warm, and I'll see you tomorrow evening. Bye-bye.